So, welcome everyone to the June seminar of our seminar in social movement studies and political action. Today we'll have Guya and Kousis presenting a paper that's about to be published, if I'm not wrong, called in Journal of Common Market Studies, from protests against Troika bailouts to pro-EU governing in Greece and Portugal. But we normally give an overview of the seminar as we start. Guya normally does this, and she does it much better than I do. I'll give it a try as well. But the seminar was basically created or had its first edition in October 2014. It had Guya and Crete as the founders. I joined the team 2 years ago, maybe. And the whole objective is to have a venue where we can discuss social movements and political action here in Lisbon and invite several guests to bring different perspectives, either not only theoretical, but also from different geographical parts of the world. And we normally, and we is very specific about it when she says like Portugal and some writings that she has done as well, that Portugal can be a platform of contact with the global south as well. So we welcome proposals from all parts of the world and try to diversify with the seminar. So normally it takes place on Wednesdays, but today we make an exception. And as you can see, we had different topics here. In May, we had Angela Dami from SNS presenting part of her PhD dissertation, Yorgos Venizelos on populism, also on new technologies for deliberative democracy at scale. And you can find these days, we try to record everything if the presenters give us the permission. And so you can find all the seminars here since a few years ago, and you can go back, I think, until the first one, in fact, in 2014, and you have a list of all the seminars. And we do this in a bit, we try to organize it month by month because we never know who comes to Portugal and may be able to present as well. So having said that, let me introduce the speakers for today. We'll have Accornero and Kousis. Guya is an assistant professor in political science here at CIES-Iscte and an integrated researcher at the Center for Research and Studies in Sociology. And since 2020, also the co-coordinator of the research group on politics and citizenship and the deputy director of the Observatory of Democracy and Political Representation here at CIES-Iscte as well. She was the co-chair of social movements, the Social Movement Research Network of the Council of European Studies, and now is a board member. And she had a project that finished last year on housing movements here in Lisbon, and has published in various journals such as the Journal of Common Market Studies, Participación y Conflicto, Current Sociology, Mobilization. And lastly, I would highlight her book on the revolution before the revolution. Maria Kousis teaches as a professor of sociology at the University of Crete and does research on environmental movements and Southern European studies. She was the director of the University of Crete Research Center and the chair of the Department of Sociology as well. She focuses on, as I said, social movements, social change, and so on, and also environmental movements. And I think the presentations are done, so the floor is yours, and you can start.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tiago, for presenting the past. So now I'm here to present our paper. Thank you for inviting me. I thank myself for inviting me. So just to add into what you say, before the video, usually you click here, you can find the video of the session, the past session. So now I will share the PowerPoint, and then we produce our paper. First of all, I want to say that it was really a great pleasure to work with Maria during these years. It was a paper that has a long story, and now finally it will be published in the Journal of Common Market Studies, I hope in the few next days. And it's about, well, we had this common interest, so we both worked on the anti-austerity movement in the respective countries. And but we had the feeling that there weren't comparative studies, or at least the journal studies about these two countries, Greece and Portugal. And also because Portugal was often not included in kind of handbooks or edited books about this cycle of approaches in the austerity. So it was a kind of let's join the forces and try to do something together. And it was really a very nice process. I learned a lot working with Maria. Thank you, Maria, for this amazing collaboration. So as you all know very well, because there are already many studies about the social movements against austerity, Southern European countries went under very difficult times after the crisis started in 2008, and also because of the austerity measures imposed in these countries, in certain countries like Greece and Portugal, under the conditions of bailout and agreements with the so-called Troika. And we know literature is very clear on that moments of crisis always bring about very important influences in politics. And what we all people that worked in this area, particularly from a social perspective, underlined actually that many of these changes were really brought about by contentious actors. So the cycle of protests that developed in this moment, this period, were really important to redefine the political landscape in Southern Europe. We have many colleagues like Tiago worked a lot on this, and published a book, recently published a book about this time, and about also the redefinition of the left after this crisis, this period of crisis and protest. And this is kind of consistent with literature on social movements, and particularly literature on cycles of protest as developed by Carvalho, and who sees the periods of intensification of protest as the moments that can drive innovations in the forms of contention, and even more important, new or transformed collective identities. So, and we are interested in seeing these changes and these transformations from a more interactive perspective. So to look at, because actually what happened in the period of intensification of protest is that the interactions and relations among all the actors involved in the political field are getting much intense. And this, of course, has an effect, the redefinition of the identities and of the boundaries also among the actors, particularly among institutional and contentious actors. What happened in this context? Which our curiosity was, and it was also curiosity that was evident in the literature, that besides the international and mostly European origin of the austerity policies, in the protest claims and targets actually focused more or at least equally on national institutions more than on European or transnational ones as responsible for the situation. And what are the impacts of these dynamics of this cycle of protest and of this, let's say, this attitude toward Europe in the political landscape of these two countries? Was the consolidation of a distinct, critical pro-European EU position, both in social movements and also in the social movement parties that after were getting governmental influence. Actually, this also kind of something that literature also detected in order in general. In this context, particularly the Laporta, Cucchi, and Fernandez, showing how the anti-austerity campaigns contributed to the rise of social movement parties, which did not reject the EU project, but adopted instead a critical pro-European stance. Actually, this result was not obvious because if we consider the role of transnational actors in the austerity, it wasn't obvious at all that this cycle of approaches didn't bring about a kind of strong Eurosceptical position, but more a critical Europeanist or alternative Europeanist. So this is the main curiosity at the bottom of our reflection. So our report, our objective was, given this background, to understand which was the role of European Union related issues in the austerity campaigns in Portugal and Greece, protest campaigns, and their impact on the interactions among different players, and also the results of these interactions in terms of their position toward Europe after. And so our main hypothesis was that the way in which the social movements organizations, but also activists, perceive and decline the European issues are very crucial points to understand how the protests develop, and how the interactions and collaborations among different actors, institutional and not, took place, and also how what was the impact of the protest on national politics. And we focus mostly on two specific processes that are the process of institutionalization and Europeanization. Given that, our main question was, so what was the role of European Union related issues in the development of this anti-austerity contention, and how did actually impact national politics in Portugal and Greece? So we look to address this question, we look at different levels of this contentious period. We look at, first of all, at the domestic social movements claims, targets, and attributions of responsibilities. We look at the organizational alliances, so in which way the EU-related issues were discussed in terms of alliances among different actors. At the strategic choices of actors in terms of, for instance, institutionalization. Other organizational and activist trajectories, which we see in these trajectories are very evident, both the processes of institutionalization and Europeanization, and in a very interactive way of the two processes. And also we look at the interactions between movements and other actors, such as left-wing parties and institutional players. So I'll say before, the two main processes we focus are institutionalization and Europeanization, and we will see after what we mean with that. But first of all, I want to give some analytical instrument to understand what we are doing here. First of all, we consider protest campaigns in the two countries and looking at protest campaigns as higher levels of contention involving whole populations engaging in wider struggles And this is defined as a sustained, organized public effort making collective claims or on target authorities. So it's more than a cycle of protest because it's in a certain way include many more different actors and also many different kind of contentious actions that are not just like the traditional repertoire of contention of social movements. But we look at these moments of protest, this campaign, as was mentioned before, with an interactive perspective, which means, and this for us is very important because it's very, this perspective is very helpful, in our opinion, to follow the processes. So to have a processual and not statical and structural perspective. So through this interactive perspective, we pay attention, quoting Jim Jasper, who is the, you can say, the more important author in this perspective. We able to pay equally symmetric way to protester and to the other players whom they engage with, and the arenas in which they interact. In this sense, we consider the state less as a monolithic structure than as a set of strategic players to interact with challenges. And I think that this perspective really helps to understand what happened in moments of contention or strong contention, where there is really the redefinition of the actors and of the boundaries among actors. And this is also a perspective that was used by Donatella Della Porta and others when they started addressing these specific players that are social movement parties, which are these parties that are much closer than others to the social movements arena, as in Portugal, Bloco de Esquerda and Communist Party. And she said that she considers the emergence and success of movement parties within an approach that is relational, so that it looks at repeated interactions of various actors, at the dynamics, and at the constructed, at the way the actors constructed their social reality. Just so you know that maybe it's a little bit boring this part, but it's very important, I think, to define very well what we are talking, which is the meaning of specific analytical tool we are using here. Also in terms of what we mean with Europeanization and institutionalization, that we see as processes. So it's not that there is a moment when this process is completely ended and arrived to, so they are kind of continuous. So we consider Europeanization as a form of transnationalization. We know that transnationalization happens in many different ways. And it's important to define what we mean with transnationalization. And we mean in this specific, we look at the specific aspect of transnationalization, that is the internalization of, internalization, that is the playing out in domestic territory of conflicts of external origin, okay? From this perspective, we can see Europeanization as the empirical effects of European integration on domestic political structure. Consistently with this perceptual approach, we address also institutionalization as a differentiated, long-term and non-linear process made of interactions and conflictual collaborations. When we talk about collaboration, it's not that they are done once forever. There are collaborations, interaction among actors are always passed through moments of conflict, moments of agreement. They need also to be looked in a kind of processual way, okay? And also institutionalization in the contentious sphere doesn't mean that certain actors stop using a more radical so institutionalization should not be seen in our view as such a movement is going, is institutionalized completely, I don't know, is started just doing institutional politics, or is transforming itself in a party, etc. There are different levels. Such a movement at the same time adopt institutional channels, like for instance, the example of European citizen initiatives, but at the same time can use a very disruptive and radical initiative as squatting or other things. So there is a complexity of plurality. So this is the research design and the sources. Very quickly, you can see more in the paper when it will be published. So we adopt a pair comparative perspective, following Taro's dual process stressing, which is very helpful to break down the processes in mechanism. And after, thanks to this, we compare it to the two countries, what was happening in the two countries, and according to these processes of institutionalization, urbanization. I don't say more about the data, but you can see more on the paper. But we use it, but especially protest event data analysis. But for the Portuguese case, the Greek case, there were two different data sets created in different moments, but covering more or less the same period, and with different sources. And also this data were also integrated with other information. For instance, in the case of Portugal, written in exploratory interviews, first result of a questionnaire survey. In the case of Greece, references also made to the attribution of responsibility of non-protest data, which Maria will explain better when she will talk about the case of Greece. And finally, in this introduction, we need to agree. We need to understand that the looking at social movements and the role of social movements in the process of Europe building is very important, and is something that has been done in literary social movement studies since the beginning, since many years. Scholars show that social movements have been seen as capable to be a critical public sphere that can contribute to making the European institutions more accountable. And this happened since the global justice movement that was really critical with the institutions, and particularly the form of the representation of democracy of European institutions. But at the same time, he considered this a model to be changed rather than destroyed. The idea of another Europe is possible, no? I think that I don't enter here in very detail about the definition of Euroscepticism and Eurocriticism and Euro-alternativism. This is can be easily found in the literature, but these are the concepts we use here, and they come from particularly from the reflection of Kayani and Guerra on this topic. In the crisis, it happened that differently from the global justice movement, social movements focused much less on transnational actors. We have a return, coming back to the national sphere of the claims and of the targets of social movements, and particularly in countries characterized by weak economies, with a call for national sovereignty. No, and this also inspired the strong transnational dimension of many austerity measures, so that were mostly imposed by external actors. And actually also in Greece, if you imagine how the European issues were important for the Greece, even with moments in which also the inclusion of Greece, remaining of Greece in the European Union was contested or was in doubt. So we can see how deep was this issue in Greece politics. Nevertheless, even in Greece, we have this very, very strong role of European Union related issues in the contentious sphere, as Maria will explain later. The reason for this coming back to the national sphere from on the side of social movements can be many. For instance, the closing of political opportunity structure at European level, so that it was very difficult to channel the claims at this level, or the immediate challenge of resisting austerity at national level. But I think that in also what our study say and in order to is that even when European Union issues seem slow in the agenda, actually they are kind of practically and pragmatically always very present in the very trajectories and both of the activists and the organizations. So it's a kind of matter of fact. You understand? Like even when it's not directly addressed in the social movements discourse and revendication, is a kind of internalized sphere of action, and we can see this in the trajectories of actors and of this end of organization. So in Portugal, we have a context of a period of increasing of contention, very important, after between 2011 and 2013. In 2000, the first austerity measures, this is well known, many studies address at this point. The first austerity measures were implemented by socialist government, but they were increased by the and particularly under the agreement with Troika after 2011 elections by a center-right government. The protest campaign started in 2011 with different actors, traditional radical left-wing parties and trade unions, new contentious actors, and also with some cases contentious governance, for instance, the involvement of Lisbon municipality in a certain demonstration. In this situation we see interactions and institutionalization, like traditionally more Eurosceptic parties such as Left Bloc and Communist Party arrived to moderate their anti-Euro positions, also in view of the alliance with the socialists at the basis of the government in 2015, and this can also be read as a result of the interaction with social movements in this period. So here is to enter the core of the research. Between 2010 and 2013, among 165 events, just 157 targeted national institutions, which means one event on 20, which is very, very low. Even if we have a movement called the Troika, which is Troika to the hell, actually the target were national institutions. On the other side, we see that in the organizations, we see a trajectory of institutionalization that also means an acceptance of European formal channels. For instance, the organizer of the first, let's say the Portuguese Indignados group, created a platform called Citizen Academy, which in their words engage in a definition of this experience in a European scale, stating that the protests open a new way of citizen participation in Europe. And I think it's not by chance that in 2014, the founders of this platform received the prize of Personality of the Year in the ambit of the first European Democratic Citizenship Awards. The acceptance of certain European campaigns as the European Citizen Initiatives is also very indicative. I don't move further to other analysis because it will take too much time, but these are all indicators of this process of contemporaneous institutionalization and Europeanization. These are certain excerpts from interviews. One environmental activist say, "I was more radical before austerity. Today I see the growing of extreme right, and this is scary. So today I'm to stay in the European Union with deep alterations. I'm highly critic, but the end of Europe is not a solution. I would like another Europe, more democratic and equal, and those that feel the progressive social movements should have a common European coordination, because right-wing people are against Europe, but at the same time, they organize themselves at a transnational level. One important point many actually say is that they are building their critical pro-Europeanism also in opposition to the European skepticism of the right-wing movements. So this is also very important. In terms of this of attitudes, our Europe among elites and citizens, we see that while they didn't change so much before and after crisis, if the parliamentarians from the left-wing parties are an exception in this picture, they were more critical towards Europe institution in the previous rounds of the survey that was implemented by these actors. And the attitudes toward Europe will surely continue to be one of the main matters of disagreement between the socialists and external allies in the government created in 2015. But left-wing parties have politicized this issue in order to prioritize the governmental collaboration and political stability. And what we see in the study, that they are able to do so also, and particularly thanks to the interaction that were developed during the protest campaign with the contentious actors. So in the interaction between these different players, not only brought to the 2015 governmental solution, but also contributed to partially modifying the attitude toward Europe or the parties more connected with social movements. And this is we can also suppose that the fact that Europe was very low, was also strategically kept low in agenda during the protest campaign, helped to leave this issue out from the arena and to allow the interaction, the collaboration that after created also the path to the government. And I now give the floor to Maria to move to the.
Thank you very much, Guya. First, I want to thank Guya for inviting me to work on a joint paper. I always thought that the comparison between Portuguese and Greek social movements were very interesting, given work on environmental mobilizations. So thank you, Guya, and thank you and the other organizers for this invitation to the monthly seminar, Social Movements and Political Action at CIES-Iscte. It was a great pleasure to work with you. Now, as Guya has already said, we are just highlighting some of the main points, but anyone interested should really take a look at the paper that is soon coming out. In this comparison, Greece had a more intensive protest experience, anti-austerity protest experience than Portugal, for obvious reasons that most people know, due to the harshest impact of the global financial crisis on the Greek state and Greece in general. And as Guya said, there has been a lot of work done on this topic, and we hope that we contribute by pointing out that social movement contributions highlight aspects that are not usually highlighted in other political sociology papers on this. So Greece, as we know, witnessed the rise of a remarkable national protest campaign against Troika. given the most severe bailout and austerity policies and Troika memoranda between 2010 and 2015, one of the papers with Mario Diani covers the first 3 years of the highly intensive protest campaign. It had the highest number of protests across Europe, even when compared with the other bailout countries, as Altiparmakis showed in his EUI PhD thesis in 2019. And more than the rest of the countries, Greece experienced a critical juncture in terms of protest intensity and political outcomes, as it is visible in the institutionalization of new left and right challenger parties rising whilst protests subsided. And this there is a lot of interesting findings from cross-national surveys on for this period in the collective volume and the project by Kousis et al. Next slide, please. Now, when Guya and I worked, we considered to highlight 3 different periods connected to key issues. So the first period in Greece is this really intense anti-austerity and anti-Troika memoranda period of 2010-2013. We had very broad cross-class coalitions that were able to form an integrated national protest campaign, which with my colleagues, Costa Canelopoulou, we coded the 31 large protest events, which included 17 national general strikes, large demonstrations in front of the parliament, and synchronized protests across the country. And this had to be over 5,000, most were over 25,000. Now the cohesion is visible in the number of connections between the events, sharing a broad set of claims, and between claims recurring in several events, as we show with Mario Diani in the 2014. Although the unified Greek protest campaign centered its demands against Troika bailouts and anti-austerity policies, the target was not primarily the EU or transnational actors, as also found out by other researchers of protest events like Burne and Hadzopoulou, Johan Rose et al., and Sertadakis. So in this graph, you see the protest event analysis that has been derived through the coding of attributions of responsibility, which do not only include blame, but also request, praise, etc. Through those attributions, we were able to identify protest events, and they more or less follow the pattern of the large protest events you see in black. But again, there is a more limited focus on Europe as a target in Greece and a primary focus on national institutions as targets through this data set as well. Guya, please. Now, the other phase of this period we examined highlights how a social movement party, Syriza, which was one of the primary key organizers of this the impressive national protest campaign, was the first European left party in government in Europe. it was a party, a social movement party that was for another Europe or critical Europeanism. But in the literature, we also see that it has been also seen as a party of post-left managerialism. So there is a discussion, and in our article, we focus mostly on the critical Europeanism. With the rising importance of Syriza as a social movement party of the European left in the contentious, but also in the parliamentary arena, there is an noted increase in its institutional, logistics, and media support to activists in various fields, especially since 2010, as the students, the literature, the related literature shows. So as soon as we see Syriza entering government, we also see a significant demobilization at the end of the Greek campaign against Troika memoranda and austerity. Of course, this is a result of the institutionalization process that I mentioned. Syriza's Europeanism and its insistence on finding solutions inside the EU and the Eurozone have remained constant throughout the period, this long period. Syriza progressively adopted a significantly more moderate political position, has been seen by Hadjistavlou as extreme moderates, and eventually by July 2015 succumbed or capitulated towards post-left managerialism in view of the Greek strong acceptance of Euro-monetarism. Next. So in the final phase that we examine, we start with a July 2015 referendum and study activist and youth perceptions in as part of the impact of these processes of Europeanization and institutionalization on the Greek identities, especially their EU identities. In 2015, you are all familiar, Tsipras called for a referendum over the Greek citizens' agreement on the third and even more severe bailout package proposed by the EC President Juncker at that time. And that led to the first rupture of the United National Campaign against Troika memoranda, because it led to the creation of two opposed protest camps for the first time since 2010, the no anti-bailout camp and the yes, we stay in Europe pro-bailout. This is very interesting, the way that they word their positions in both campaigns, because with the way that they're presented, the claims are presented, the European identities are fostered and encouraged in both camps. Maybe more than one, but there is literature that we cite that shows that it is in both, actually. So although Syriza participated in the protest against EC's proposal and the no votes amounted to 61.3%, the Syriza-NL government coalition was unexpectedly conciliatory, almost as if the yes pro-Eurozone camp had won, as Altiparmakis mentions. And we see this in the immediate replacement of the Ministry of Economy, Varoufakis, as it illustrates this. Now, Syriza capitulated to Troika demands following a spiral of negotiations, very harsh negotiations, I must emphasize, tactical and communicative maneuvers, and it finally signed a new memorandum and implemented new harsh austerity measures and neoliberal reforms. Now, the new division against the bailout, but not exiting the EU, and for the bailout to remain in the EU, is adequately reflected in recent findings from cross-country research on the formation of dual and complementary identities, both primarily national and European, on youth perceptions based on 2018 survey in the Eureka project, where we see higher levels of trust towards the EU than to the Greek government. And also pro-EU views by representatives of transnational solidarity organizations in Greece during the crisis.
Sorry.
Yeah, next. Yeah, thank you. So overall, we see that the activism against EU institutions with claims and public discourses towards them were very limited, or were not as central as the national institutions targeting, primarily the Greek parliament and the two main political parties. So even though we do have the EU as part of the claims repertoire, we do not have it as central as we would expect it, given, as Guya said, the claims that were made, the anti-memoranda claims that were made during these protest campaigns. So then we had the division, and again, we do not have claims in the two different camps. Once the unified campaign was ruptured, we still do not have any strong anti-EU claims. So the similarly divided parliament, pro and anti-referendum votes, the sustainability of Greek government's collaborations with EU institutions, as well as the 2019 results of the European local and national elections, with a comeback of new democracy, attest to the deep interlinkages between the EU and the Greek political protagonists. So we conclude now, and thank you very much, because this has been a long presentation for you. Our analysis highlights the connection between the mechanisms of movement, institutionalization, and Europeanization in Portugal and Greece. And our paired comparison shows that both mechanisms were boosted by increasing interaction between all the players involved in this arena of anti-austerity. The European space has been a matter of fact for solidarity and contentious actions by a wide variety of activist groups across different fields. And all these show that beyond explicit discourses, claims, frames, and targets, Europe has been an unavoidable contentious arena for social movements action and for their relations with institutional politics and parties. Guya, would you like to share?
Okay. Yes, so just as concluding really shortly, so in Portugal, we have at the end of the cycle of protest, both alternative and critical pro-European Euro positions that emerged from the campaign, and also were developed during the trajectory of the main actors. And this interaction helped to make the 2015 government agreement between left bloc, PCP, and Socialist possible, besides the existing cleavage in the referendum group. And yeah, so maybe you can mention a little bit the main conclusion about Greece and how it's or what do you think? You want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's we can say to emphasize that in the exceptional case of Greece, the deep interlinkages between EU and Greek political protagonists point to the issue of the inevitability of Europe. In the aftermath of anti-austerity protests and Syriza's entries in government, Tsipras' 2015 referendum over the third bailout, as we said, led to these two campaigns, but to also the signing of the third most severe bailout package. Thus, in Greece, too, pro-European, albeit critical voices prevail, and collaborations with EU institutions have been solidified, while Syriza maintained its vision for another Europe. Now, from this prism and drawing on this literature, our findings shed new light, we believe, and we hope that you will also see this, on the role of social movements in building critical pro-EU positions and bridging them to the institutional arena through the interlinked processes of institutionalization and Europeanization. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So maybe now I do this. And or is better to
Go there.
what do you think? Yeah.
You can stay as well, because you might have to answer questions, no?
Yeah, but they can see me from that.
Right, thank you very much for the presentation in this wonderful paper. I would ask now, when we have time, still time for discussing and debating the paper and for questions. So the floor is open both here and at home for questions. Who wants to start?
Hello, everyone.
No.
Hey. Okay. I have actually a curiosity, a question, but first of all, thank you very much for your presentation, Guya and Maria. Guya, can you just comment, explain a little bit more like this? One of the conclusions there about the relation between this interaction between the social movements in this period and 2015 agreement between PAS, Bloco de Esquerda, and PCP, the Geringonça. If you could just comment a little bit more about this topic.
Sure. Can you hear me from here?
Yes.
So this is I know that the presentation was kind of long because it's a perceptual approach. So it's really narrating the story that makes the difference. But it's also, but at the same time, we couldn't really enter into the details. So what happened is at the beginning of the cycle of protest in 2011, the new content sector like Geração Arasca and after Troika, mainly Geração Arasca, were kind of in opposition. There were an opposition between these old new content sectors and old content sectors such as the trade unions, particularly and other conflictual actors already established in the country. But with the development of the cycle of protest, we started seeing collaborations and among these actors, like demonstrations that were called by all of them. And also if in 2013, a gigantic demonstration in just in Lisbon, 800,000 people, also with the support of local municipality, which some councillors really supporting the social movements against the central government. No? And but coming back, there was a moment also where there was created a platform called the Democratic Congress for Alternatives. It was a congress that integrated very different souls of the left, institutional and not, associations, public figures, etc. A gigantic event that really was the role of elaborating an alternative to austerity. And actually, well, we studied this, and I have another article about that. But these interactions and the collaborations, etc., that also many times conflictual, they were actually the basis for. And also, we need to consider that at the time, the president of the major was Antonio Costa, that after was prime minister. So the experiences that they were developed at local level in Lisbon, they were really a very important basis for the agreement after a level of national institutions in the 2015.
Okay, thank you, Guya.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Question? Do we have more questions or feedback? Comments? I think Luana is getting ready.
Anastasia Value wants.
So we have Anastasia, right?
You don't hear me?
Yes.
Ah, okay, sorry. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. For me, good morning. I'm in Brazil. It's very nice to hear you and to meet Professor Maria. I'm Guya's advisor on the PhD. And I don't think I could round up a very good question. But I was thinking of the role, and that I wanted to hear more about the role and the interactions with the extreme right actors and players, and the part that they take in this process of institutionalization and Europeanization. I was thinking a lot about that because how the left and the movements have to react now of the rise of this extreme right, and somehow also the cooptation. I don't know, I didn't formulate very well, but I was thinking about the interaction with these players and the impact of that. Thank you very much.
I think this is more for Maria because I feel it.
Thank you, Anastasia. It's a very good question. What I don't think that I will be able to give you that reply that I think you're looking for, because the extreme right had their own protests, and they were not so visible in the national protest campaign. We used a blanketing approach for the to identify the 32 protest events, which means that we used as many sources as we were able to get. However, when we coded the responses, they were extremely rare, and they did not formulate a category by itself. I would suggest that you probably know to read Elena's on the extreme right mobilizations. So what we have from the literature is their participation in the Syntagma Square camp. There has been some discussions on this. I think I would say limited, because the researchers usually do not automatically consider them social movements, although I think they are. And in conversations with Mario Diani, he also, I think, depending on the features they display in the public sphere, one could consider them as a social movement. So their participation, I would say, I cannot give you the picture that I think would require more refined data. Because if we had, for example, a very detailed study on the Syntagma Square camp and the antagonistic debates that were taking place between them and the rest of the actors, then we would see something. But it's an excellent question. I am sorry that we didn't identify them as a major force in the Unified Protest Campaign. They didn't come up as a category, and we didn't, the categories were constructed through pilot coding. They were not constructed a priori. So we should have been able to identify them if they were playing a bigger role. I didn't see them play that big a role. However, Elena's has a book with extremely enlightening data and analysis on this. So I would suggest that, to go in that direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juana. Thank you, Maria. Do we have more questions or comments? Yeah, maybe I have something, but maybe it's a tricky question. But I was hearing you and thinking about processes and both countries, and I was thinking, was there any sort of learning process within the actors and learning and understanding how to deal with the EU, or that didn't really came to?
I think that
I was thinking of this in terms of learning processes of the actors.
the point is that but this is not really there in the paper, just it wasn't the main focus, but I think that this wave of movement was much less focused on transnational issues than the global justice movement until the early 2000s and in general, let's say. But it's also true that we are on another completely step of European integration. So it's not more. We talk a lot about democracy when it's not consolidated or not too strong issue. It's a very strong issue. But when it's normal, it's not at the center of the focus. I have the impression that the learning was not exactly inside this specific moment, but was in all these years. And it's not just a learning as in terms. It's kind of cognitive learning, but almost a practical learning.
Yeah.
So we see all the now study, many activists have a European trajectory. So they, in a certain way, is the sphere where they act. So it's not constantly under the focus of their attention, because it's kind of a given context that in which they act. And I think that is also related to the fact that more and more we also see local institutions. So given that, okay, there is the context of Europe and the national, it is given, like what we really, the local dimension and the things we can directly interact with are very important. We see this in Portugal, for instance. So I think that the learning was more a kind of a process. So we are at a completely different stage of Europe in respect to early 2000. Then we didn't have, we started having the common money, for instance, and now it's more, everything is much more consolidated. So I really don't know if this can give something to your question, but I think it's a reflection. It is in historicizing the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would like to give it a try. It's a very nice question on the learning process. The only, I think we have data from 2 European collaborative projects that show us that there has been an impact on Europeanization, pro-European attitudes. We have, and we mentioned this in the paper, for example, we had studied transnational solidarity organizations in Greece in the context of the EU-funded Transol project. And there we see that, for example, representatives of transnational solidarity organizations in the fields of employment, labor, migration, and disability, they all turn towards the EU as a supporter of their actions. And this is understandable given the Greek state situation. But it also it shows an enhancement, limited, I would say, towards transnational solidarity activism. Because there are, we still haven't analyzed this, but there have been a lot of networking in the meantime, given the crisis, the management crisis related to the refugees in 2015 and 16. That was a major EU issue as well. So there have been a lot of building alliances amongst movements that use the economic crisis as a foundation and solidify these alliances. We also see it in young people's attitudes towards the EU in the context of the Eureka EU-funded project. And we see there that Greek youth in 2018, in a national survey that was done also across the rest of the countries of the collaborative project, Greek youth show more trust towards EU institutions than towards Greek institutions. And they show less distrust to EU than to Greek institutions. This says a lot, because Greek youth was that part of the Greek population that was hit hardest with the highest unemployment rate in Greece during the crisis. But also the exodus of thousands of young Greek young men and women to the EU shows how the EU is both an opportunity and a constraint, and creates these types of hybrid identities. So I would say, because youth lived through this crisis and participated in the events, they were one of the major bodies of participation after the labor unions. They felt both the impact of the bailouts, but also they saw a way out of this situation. So the social movement experience, and they also voted in the national elections during this period that brought Syriza and Anel to power. So this process, I think, was a learning process that strengthens these hybrid identities. Thank you. Hope I didn't take much time.
Thank you, Maria.
We see this also in Portugal, that they started using European initiatives and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
I go there and say,
if we don't have any other questions, maybe we can close the session here. And thank Maria and Guya.
if I look at the camera, I don't look at you. Sorry,
Hello.
that's okay. I cannot see you. Okay, so
To thank you both for the presentation, and congratulate you for the upcoming paper. We'll hope to see it very soon in published. And I forgot to announce the next session for next month. We'll have Antonio Valentin from Yale University presenting on the relation between, on the 19th of June, on the relation between protest and voting for the Green parties, specifically the case of Fridays for Future in Germany. So we hope to see you all there to close the academic year. And see you soon, and thank you very much.
thank you very much. And it was really nice to see you here, Maria. We keep in touch. Oh, I cannot hear you. I think you have the ear without sound. Cannot hear you.
Thanks to everyone and for your questions, and we hope to see you sometime in presenting in some conference.
Yeah.
Hopefully. And if you are in Crete, do let me know.
Okay.
Sure.
All right.
Have a nice weekend, everybody.
Nice weekend.
Particularly.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.